The Henderson family lived in a quiet neighborhood where every house looked almost identical. White picket fences, neatly trimmed lawns, and two-car garages lined both sides of Maple Street. To anyone passing by, the Hendersons seemed like they had it all figured out. But if you looked closely enough, you might notice that their curtains were always drawn, even on sunny days. You might see that while other families gathered outside for weekend barbecues, the Hendersons stayed inside, their house silent as a tomb. Inside that house lived 7-year-old Lily Henderson, a girl with curious brown eyes and a habit of biting her lower lip when she was nervous. She lived with her mother, Rachel, her father, James, and her 12-year-old brother, Noah. Lily loved drawing pictures of butterflies and reading books about adventures in faraway lands. But those were things she only did in her room, with the door closed, trying not to make any noise. The thing about the Henderson household was that it ran on a very specific set of rules. These weren't the normal kind of rules that families have, like doing your homework before watching television or cleaning up after dinner. These were different. These were the kind of rules that made everyone hold their breath, the kind that changed depending on what mood James was in on any given day. Some mornings, James would come downstairs whistling and everyone would relax just a little bit. On those days, he might ruffle Noah's hair or ask Rachel about her day. But those mornings were rare, like finding a 4-leaf clover. Most days, the family had learned to read his face the moment he appeared, adjusting their entire existence based on what they saw there. Rachel had stopped humming while she cooked. She used to hum all the time, little tunes that Lily couldn't quite recognize but found comforting. Now the kitchen was silent except for the sound of chopping vegetables and boiling water. Lily sometimes wondered if her mother had forgotten all those songs, or if they were just locked up inside her somewhere, waiting for a chance to come out again. Noah had been different too before. Lily had vague memories of her brother playing guitar in the garage, the music drifting through the house like sunshine. He'd been teaching himself from videos online and he wasn't very good yet, but he'd been enthusiastic. That guitar now sat in the corner of his room, gathering dust. James had never explicitly forbidden him from playing it. He didn't have to. One comment about that racket and a certain look had been enough. Dinner time was the worst. The family would sit around the table and James would ask questions. "How was school, Lily?" he'd say, and she'd have to answer just right. Not too much detail because that was annoying, not too little because that was disrespectful. She'd learned to give answers that were exactly 3 sentences long. That seemed to be the safe zone. If Rachel served something James didn't like, he wouldn't yell. That would have been easier in some ways. Instead, he'd push his plate away slightly and eat in silence, and everyone would know that meant Rachel had failed somehow. She'd apologize even though she'd cooked his favorite meals 100 times before. The apology was expected, like a script they all knew by heart. Lily had started to notice things that other kids her age might not see. She noticed how her mother's hands shook slightly when she poured James his coffee in the morning. She noticed how Noah had developed a stutter that only appeared at home, never at school. She noticed how their house, which should have been full of noise and life like her friends' houses, felt more like a library where everyone was afraid of disturbing the silence. At school, Lily was a different person. She laughed with her friends during recess and raised her hand eagerly in class. Her teacher, Mrs. Chen, had commented several times on what a bright, engaged student she was. But the moment Lily walked through her front door, it was like someone had turned down the volume on her personality. She became smaller, quieter, more careful. One night, Lily had a friend over for the first time in months. Her name was Sophie, and she lived 3 houses down. They were working on a school project together, building a model of the solar system in Lily's room. Sophie was naturally loud and bubbly, the kind of kid who laughed at her own jokes and didn't think twice about speaking her mind. "Why is your house so quiet?" Sophie had asked, not meaning anything by it, just curious. Lily had frozen, her hand still holding a painted styrofoam ball that was supposed to be Jupiter. She didn't know how to explain that quiet was safer. That noise brought attention, and attention could go wrong so quickly. Before Lily could answer, they'd heard James coming up the stairs. Sophie had said something completely innocent, something about how her dad always played music too loud on weekends. James had smiled, but it was the smile that didn't reach his eyes, the one that made Lily's stomach hurt. After Sophie left, James had made a comment about how they wouldn't be having friends over anymore if they couldn't keep the noise down. Never mind that the girls had barely been talking above a whisper. That was the way things were controlled in the Henderson house. Not with violence or screaming, but with looks and silences and the constant feeling that you were walking on a frozen lake, never quite sure when the ice might crack beneath you. Rachel had tried to leave before. Lily didn't know all the details, but she'd overheard a phone conversation late one night about 6 months ago. Her mother had been talking to her sister Diane, who lived 2 states away. Rachel had been crying, something Lily had only seen her do behind closed doors, and she was saying things like, "I don't know if I can do this anymore, and the kids deserve better." Diane had offered to let them stay with her to help Rachel get back on her feet. For a few days, Lily had noticed her mother looking at them differently, like she was making calculations in her head. She'd seen Rachel looking up apartments online when she thought no one was watching. But then something had changed. James had been unusually kind for a week, bringing home flowers and taking them out to dinner. He'd promised to do better, to change, to be the man Rachel had married. And Rachel, exhausted from years of tiptoeing and hoping, had wanted to believe him. So she'd stayed. The flowers had died in their vase, and within 2 weeks everything had gone back to exactly how it was before. But something was different this time. Lily couldn't put her finger on it exactly, but she could see it in her mother's eyes. There was a hardness there that hadn't been before, like something had finally crystallized inside her. Rachel had started making phone calls when James was at work, using a quiet voice that Lily had to strain to hear through the walls. One afternoon in late September, Lily came home from school to find her mother sitting at the kitchen table with a stack of papers in front of her. Rachel looked up when Lily walked in, and there were tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling. It was the strangest combination Lily had ever seen. "Sweetie," Rachel had said, pulling Lily onto her lap, even though Lily was getting too big for that. "Things are going to change soon. I need you to be brave, okay? Can you do that for me?" Lily had nodded, not really understanding, but feeling the weight of the moment. She noticed one of the papers had official-looking letterhead at the top. She recognized some of the words: divorce and custody and restraining order. Big words that she'd heard before, but never in connection with her own life. Over the next few weeks, the house became even more tense. James knew something was coming, even though Rachel hadn't told him yet. He'd found a lawyer's business card that had fallen out of Rachel's purse, and the unspoken knowledge hung in the air like smoke. He wasn't trying to fix things this time. Instead, there was a coldness to him that was somehow worse than anything before. Rachel's lawyer, a woman named Ms. Torres, had come to visit twice, always during school hours when James was at work. Lily had met her the second time when she'd come home early because of a teacher workshop day. Ms. Torres had kind eyes and spoke to Lily like she was a real person, not just a kid to be talked down to. "Your mom is doing something very brave," Ms. Torres had told her while Rachel was in the other room gathering documents. "Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, and the best thing they can do is try to fix them, even when it's hard." The court date had been set for November 15th, just 6 weeks away. Lily had overheard her mother on the phone with Ms. Torres, and the conversation had made her stomach hurt. Rachel's voice had been shaking as she explained that without proof, without evidence of something concrete, the judge might give James joint custody. He'd get to have the kids half the time, and there would be nothing Rachel could do about it. "But he doesn't hit them," Rachel had said, and Lily could hear the frustration in her voice. "He doesn't yell. How do I prove that he's damaging them when there are no bruises to show? How do I explain the way Noah can't look him in the eye anymore? How do I make someone understand that my daughter has started having nightmares about disappointing people?" Lily had pressed her ear harder against the door, her heart pounding. She'd known in some deep part of herself that her family wasn't normal, but hearing her mother put it into words made it real in a way it hadn't been before. A week before the court date, Ms. Torres had asked if Lily might want to talk to the judge. She'd explained it very carefully, sitting across from Lily at the kitchen table with a cup of hot chocolate between them. She'd said that judges sometimes like to hear from kids in custody cases, that it helps them understand what's really happening in a home. Rachel had immediately said no. She'd pulled Lily close and said she didn't want to put that kind of pressure on her baby, that this was her fight, not Lily's. But Lily had surprised them both by speaking up. "I want to," she'd said quietly. "I want to tell what it's like." That night, lying in bed, Lily had thought about all the things she'd been keeping inside. She thought about the time James had thrown away Noah's guitar sheet music because it was cluttering the garage. She thought about the family barbecue they'd been invited to last summer, and how James had said no because he didn't want Rachel gossiping with the neighbors. She thought about her own 8th birthday party, which had been canceled at the last minute because James had decided the house wasn't clean enough for guests. Even though Rachel had spent 2 days scrubbing every surface, these weren't dramatic stories. There was no big explosive incident she could point to. But together they painted a picture of a life lived in fear, of a family slowly suffocating under the weight of one person's need for control. As November 15th crept closer, Lily began practicing in her mind what she might say. She didn't want to sound like she was reading from a script. She didn't want the judge to think her mom had told her what to say. She just wanted to tell the truth, simple and plain, about what it felt like to live in a house where love had been replaced by fear. The night before the hearing, Lily couldn't sleep at all. She lay in her bed watching the shadows on her ceiling, thinking about tomorrow. Her mother came in around midnight and climbed into bed next to her, something she hadn't done since Lily was very small. They didn't talk much. They just held hands in the darkness, both of them knowing that tomorrow would change everything, one way or another. Lily thought about her father and realized with surprise that she still loved him. But she'd also learned something important. Loving someone didn't mean you had to live in fear of them. Loving someone didn't mean making yourself smaller so they could feel bigger. And sometimes the most loving thing you could do was tell the truth, even when the truth was hard to hear. As the first light of dawn began to creep through her window, Lily made a promise to herself. Tomorrow in that courtroom she would find her voice. She would say the things that needed to be said. She would be brave not just for her mother, but for Noah and even for herself, because silence might feel safer, but she was learning that it came with a cost too high to keep paying. The morning of November 15th arrived cold and gray, with clouds hanging low over the city like a heavy blanket. Lily woke up before her alarm, her stomach doing uncomfortable flips. She could hear her mother moving around downstairs, probably making breakfast that neither of them would be able to eat. The house felt different somehow, like it was holding its breath along with them. Rachel had laid out Lily's clothes the night before, a simple navy blue dress with white collar, tights, and her good shoes that she usually only wore to church. Lily got dressed slowly, her fingers fumbling with the buttons. She looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the serious-faced girl staring back at her. She looked older than 7, or maybe just tired in a way that kids shouldn't be tired. Downstairs, Noah was already at the kitchen table, pushing cereal around his bowl without eating it. He looked up when Lily came in, and she could see the worry in his eyes. Her brother had barely spoken all week, and his stutter had gotten so bad that he'd stopped trying to talk at all unless he absolutely had to. "You don't have to do this, you know," he said quietly, the words coming out slow and careful. "You're just a kid. This isn't your responsibility." But Lily had made up her mind. She'd spent the whole week thinking about it, and every time she considered backing out, she remembered something else. She remembered the time she'd accidentally spilled juice at dinner, and had spent the rest of the evening in her room. Not because she'd been sent there, but because the disappointment in James's eyes had been too much to bear. She remembered how her mother had stopped wearing bright colors, sticking to grays and blacks and navy blues, like she was trying to fade into the walls. "Someone has to," Lily said, pouring herself some orange juice she knew she wouldn't drink. "Someone has to tell the truth." Rachel came into the kitchen then, and Lily noticed her mother had been crying. Her eyes were red and puffy, but she'd put on makeup to try to hide it. She was wearing her best outfit, a charcoal gray pantsuit that she'd bought for job interviews back when she'd been thinking about going back to work. James had convinced her they didn't need the money, that her place was at home. Looking back now, Rachel could see it for what it was, another way to keep her dependent, another form of control. The three of them sat at the table, not really eating, just going through the motions. James had moved out 2 weeks earlier, staying with his brother across town while the legal proceedings played out. The house felt different without him, lighter somehow, but also scary in its emptiness. They'd gotten used to organizing their entire lives around one person's moods, and without that anchor, they felt adrift. Ms. Torres had arranged to meet them at the courthouse at 9 o'clock. The hearing was scheduled for 10, which gave them an hour to go over everything one last time. Lily had her statement written down on index cards in her pocket, even though Ms. Torres had told her she didn't need to memorize anything. The lawyer had said the most important thing was just to be honest, to speak from her heart. The drive to the courthouse was quiet except for the radio playing softly in the background. Rachel kept glancing at Lily in the rearview mirror, and Lily could see the guilt written all over her mother's face. She knew Rachel was second-guessing everything, wondering if she was doing the right thing by letting her daughter testify. "Mom," Lily said from the back seat, "I want to do this. Please stop worrying." Rachel's eyes filled with tears again, but she nodded and kept driving. The courthouse was a massive gray building downtown, with tall columns out front that made it look important and intimidating. People rushed in and out of the revolving doors. Lawyers in suits carrying briefcases, families huddled together looking worried or relieved, depending on how their cases had gone. Lily held tight to her mother's hand as they walked up the steps, her heart beating so hard she could feel it in her throat. Ms. Torres was waiting for them inside, just past the security checkpoint. She smiled when she saw them, but Lily could tell even the lawyer was nervous. This was a big deal, bigger than Lily had really understood until this moment. They found a quiet corner in the hallway outside the courtroom, and Ms. Torres knelt down to Lily's level. She had kind eyes, the kind that crinkled at the corners when she smiled, and she smelled like lavender and coffee. "Okay, sweetie," she said gently. "I want to go over a few things with you one more time. When you're in there, the judge is going to ask you some questions. Her name is Judge Richardson, and she's very nice. You just answer honestly, okay? If you don't understand a question, it's perfectly fine to say so. If you need a break, you can ask for one. And if at any point you want to stop, you just tell us and we'll stop. This is not a test. There are no wrong answers as long as you're telling the truth." Lily nodded, pulling the index cards out of her pocket. Her hands were shaking slightly, making the cards rattle. Ms. Torres gently took them from her and tucked them into her briefcase. "You won't need these," she said. "I know you've been practicing, and that's great, but the judge doesn't want to hear something you memorized. She wants to hear from you, the real you. Just talk like you're talking to me right now or like you're talking to your teacher at school. Can you do that?" "I think so," Lily whispered. They had about 15 minutes before the hearing was supposed to start when James arrived. Lily saw him first, walking down the hallway with his own lawyer, a tall man in an expensive-looking suit. Her father looked different somehow, smaller maybe, or maybe she was just seeing him differently now. He glanced their way, and for a moment their eyes met. Lily didn't look away. She just stared at him steadily, and she saw something flicker across his face, surprise maybe, or uncertainty. He was used to her looking down, looking away, making herself small. This new Lily, the one who could hold his gaze, was unfamiliar territory. Then the courtroom doors opened and a bailiff called their case number. Rachel squeezed Lily's hand so tight it almost hurt. Noah, who had been sitting silently on a bench, stood up and pulled his little sister into a hug. "You got this," he whispered into her hair. "You're the bravest person I know." The courtroom was smaller than Lily had imagined from watching TV shows. There were wooden benches like church pews, a high desk where the judge would sit, and 2 tables facing it where the lawyers would be. Everything was dark wood and serious-looking, and the whole room smelled like old paper and furniture polish. Judge Richardson was already seated when they entered. She was a black woman, probably in her 50s, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a neat bun and glasses perched on her nose. She looked up from the paper she was reading and smiled at Lily. A genuine warm smile that made some of the knots in Lily's stomach loosen just a little. The first part of the hearing was boring, all legal talk that Lily didn't really understand. The lawyers presented documents and made arguments, using words like petitioner and respondent and grounds for custody modification. Lily sat between her mother and Ms. Torres, swinging her legs because they didn't quite reach the floor, trying to pay attention but finding her mind wandering. She looked over at her father once. He was sitting very straight at his table, his face carefully neutral like a mask he'd put on. His lawyer was whispering something to him, but James wasn't really listening. He was staring at a point on the wall above the judge's head. His jaw clenched tight. After what felt like forever, Judge Richardson looked over at Ms. Torres and said, "I understand you have a witness you'd like to call." "Yes, Your Honor," Ms. Torres replied, standing up. The petitioner would like to call Lily Henderson to testify. And just like that, it was time. Lily's heart started racing again. Rachel kissed her forehead and whispered, "You don't have to do this, baby. We can still say no." But Lily shook her head. She stood up, her legs feeling wobbly, and walked toward the front of the courtroom. The bailiff, a friendly-looking older man, helped her into the witness chair and adjusted a microphone so it was at her level. He asked her to raise her right hand. "Do you promise to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?" he asked. "I do," Lily said, her voice coming out smaller than she'd intended. Judge Richardson leaned forward slightly, her expression gentle. "Hello, Lily. Thank you for being here today. I know this might feel a little scary, but I want you to know you're doing great already. I'm going to ask you some questions, and you just answer them the best you can. Okay? There's no hurry. Take your time." "Okay," Lily said. "Can you tell me how old you are?" "I'm 7. I'll be 8 in April." "And what grade are you in at school?" "2nd grade. I'm in Mrs. Chen's class. Do you like school?" "Yes, ma'am. I like reading the best." "And art class?" Judge Richardson smiled. "Those are good subjects. I liked reading when I was your age, too. Now, Lily, I want to talk to you about your home. Can you tell me what it's like living at home with your mom and dad and brother?" This was it. This was the moment Lily had been preparing for. She took a deep breath, and suddenly all the words she'd been rehearsing flew out of her head. She couldn't remember any of the things she'd planned to say. So instead, she just started talking, letting the truth come out however it wanted to. "It's very quiet," she began. "Our house is always really quiet. Not like my friends' houses. When I go to Sophie's house, her dad is always playing music and her mom is always laughing and talking on the phone. But our house isn't like that." "Why do you think your house is so quiet?" the judge asked. Lily thought about this carefully. "Because we're afraid to make noise. Not afraid like scared of ghosts or the dark. Afraid like we might mess up, like we might do something wrong and make Dad upset." "Has your dad ever hit you or your brother?" "No, ma'am." "Has he ever hit your mother?" "No." "Then why are you afraid of making him upset?" This was harder to explain. Lily bit her lower lip, trying to find the right words. "It's not about hitting. It's about the way he looks at you when you disappoint him. It's about how everything has to be just right. But the rules keep changing, so you never really know what right is. It's about how Mom stopped singing and Noah stopped playing guitar and I stopped having friends over, because it's just easier to be quiet and small and not take up any space." The courtroom had gone very still. Even James's lawyer, who had been shuffling papers, had stopped to listen. Judge Richardson's voice was gentle when she spoke again. "Can you give me an example of what you mean?" Lily nodded. "Like dinner time. Dad would ask us about our day, but you had to answer just right. If you said too much, he'd get annoyed and say you were rambling. If you didn't say enough, he'd get upset and say you were being disrespectful. So you had to find the middle. But the middle was different every day depending on his mood. And we all got really good at reading his face when he came home, figuring out what kind of day it was going to be." "What about happy times?" the judge asked. "Were there good days too?" "Sometimes," Lily admitted. "Sometimes he'd be in a good mood and everything would be okay. But those days almost made it worse because you'd start to hope, you know? You'd think maybe things were getting better. But then something small would happen, like Mom would burn the toast or Noah would leave his backpack in the hallway. And the good mood would just disappear. And you'd remember that the good days weren't real. They were just breaks between the hard days." Lily could see her mother crying now, tears streaming down Rachel's face. Noah had his head down, his shoulders shaking. Even Ms. Torres was wiping at her eyes discreetly. "Lily," Judge Richardson said quietly, "why did you want to come here today and tell me these things?" Lily looked at her father, then really looked at him. His mask had cracked and she could see tears on his cheeks too. When she spoke directly to him, even though she was supposed to be answering the judge. "Because I love my dad," she said. "I really do. But I learned something important. Love isn't supposed to make you afraid. Love isn't supposed to make you feel like you have to be perfect all the time. Love isn't supposed to make you small." She turned back to Judge Richardson. "My mom tried to make it work for so long. She tried so hard. But she's tired and Noah's tired and I'm tired. We're tired of walking on eggshells. We're tired of being afraid. And I thought if I came here and told the truth, maybe things could change. Maybe we could remember what it's like to be loud and messy and take up space without being scared." The judge was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Thank you, Lily, that was very brave. Do you have anything else you want to tell me?" Lily thought about it. There was so much more she could say. So many little moments and memories that all added up to the same thing. But she felt like she'd said what needed to be said. Just one more thing, Lily said. I don't hate my dad. I don't want him to go away forever. I just want him to understand that what he's been doing hurts us, and I want us to be able to breathe again. Judge Richardson nodded slowly. Thank you, Lily. You can go sit back down with your mother now. As Lily walked back to her seat, her legs still shaky but her heart feeling lighter somehow, she realized something. Speaking the truth hadn't been as scary as she'd thought. Holding it inside had been scarier. Living with it day after day after day had been the truly frightening thing. Rachel pulled her close the moment she sat down, holding her tight and whispering, I'm so proud of you, over and over. Noah reached over and squeezed her hand, and Lily, feeling exhausted but somehow stronger than she'd ever felt before, leaned against her mother and waited to see what would happen next. The truth was out there now, hanging in the air of that courtroom. Whatever came next, at least she'd had the courage to say it. After Lily finished testifying, James's lawyer stood up to ask her questions. He was a tall man with silver hair and an expensive suit, the kind of person who looked like he was used to winning. Ms. Torres had warned Lily about this part, explaining that the other lawyer might try to confuse her or suggest that her mother had told her what to say. But she'd also told Lily not to worry, just to keep telling the truth the same way she had been. Lily, the lawyer began, his voice trying to sound friendly but not quite getting there. You love your father, don't you? Yes, sir, Lily answered clearly. And he's never hit you or hurt you physically, correct? That's right. He provides a nice home for you, makes sure you have food and clothes and everything you need. Yes, the lawyer smiled like he'd proven something important. So your father takes care of you and loves you and you love him. Doesn't that sound like a normal, healthy family relationship? Lily thought about this for a moment. She could feel everyone in the courtroom watching her, waiting to see what she'd say. My friend Sophie has a goldfish, she said finally. She feeds it every day, keeps its tank clean, makes sure it has everything it needs. But it still lives in a bowl and it can't ever leave. Just because something is taken care of doesn't mean it's happy. Judge Richardson made a small sound, almost like she was trying not to laugh. James's lawyer looked frustrated, like Lily's answer wasn't what he'd expected. He tried a few more questions, asking if her mother had told her what to say, if she'd practiced her testimony, if she was angry at her father for some specific reason. But Lily answered each question honestly and simply, and there was something about the way she spoke, so genuine and thoughtful, that made it clear these were her own words, her own feelings. Finally, the lawyer gave up and sat down. Judge Richardson looked at both sides and said she needed some time to think about everything she'd heard. She gathered up her papers and stood, and everyone in the courtroom stood too. I'm going to take a 30-minute recess, the judge announced. When I come back, I'll give my ruling. Everyone please remain available. The bailiff called out, all rise, and Judge Richardson disappeared through a door behind her bench. The moment she was gone, the tension in the room seemed to release like air from a balloon. Rachel immediately pulled Lily into her arms, holding her so tight Lily could barely breathe. You were amazing, Rachel whispered. I've never been more proud of anyone in my entire life. They walked out into the hallway, and Ms. Torres bought them all water from a vending machine. Lily's hands were still shaking from the adrenaline, and she gulped the cold water gratefully. Noah sat down on a bench and pulled Lily down next to him. That thing about the goldfish, he said quietly, a small smile on his face. That was pretty smart, Lil. Across the hallway, James stood with his lawyer, the two of them talking in low voices. Every so often, James would glance over at his family, and each time he did, Lily noticed something different in his expression. The confidence he usually carried was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like confusion or maybe shame. Once their eyes met, and James quickly looked away. The 30 minutes felt both too long and too short. Lily kept replaying her testimony in her head, wondering if she'd said the right things, if the judge had believed her, if any of it would actually matter. Ms. Torres seemed cautiously optimistic, but she kept reminding them that you could never predict what a judge would decide. When the bailiff finally called them back in, Lily's stomach was doing somersaults again. They filed back into the courtroom and took their seats. Judge Richardson entered, looking serious and thoughtful. She sat down at her bench and took a moment to arrange her papers before looking up at everyone. I want to start, the judge began, by thanking Lily for her testimony today. It takes tremendous courage for a child to speak up, especially about matters that involve her own family. I was very impressed by her honesty and insight. Lily felt her mother squeeze her hand. I've been a family court judge for 23 years, Judge Richardson continued, and I've heard a lot of custody cases. Some involve clear abuse, and those are terrible but straightforward. The hardest cases are the ones like this, where the harm being done is real but not visible, where there are no bruises to photograph, no police reports to review, just a family slowly suffocating under the weight of control and fear. The judge looked directly at James then. Mr. Henderson, I don't think you're a monster. I don't think you wake up every day planning to hurt your family. But I do think, whether you realize it or not, you have created an environment where your wife and children are afraid to be themselves, where they've learned to make themselves smaller and quieter, just to keep the peace. And that is a form of harm. James's face had gone pale. His lawyer put a hand on his arm, but James didn't seem to notice. That being said, the judge went on, I also heard Lily say something very important. She said she doesn't want you to go away forever. She said she still loves you. And I believe her. So here's what I'm going to order. Judge Richardson picked up a paper and began reading. Sole physical custody will be granted to Rachel Henderson. The children will reside primarily with their mother. James Henderson will have supervised visitation rights, 2 afternoons per week, to take place at the Family Connection Center until further notice. Rachel let out a breath she seemed to have been holding forever. Ms. Torres nodded, satisfied. Additionally, the judge continued, I am ordering both parents to attend co-parenting classes. Mr. Henderson? You will also complete a 12-week program on emotional awareness and healthy family dynamics. This is not a punishment. This is an opportunity. Your daughter gave you a gift today when she told you the truth with love. What you choose to do with that gift will determine whether you have a relationship with your children going forward. The judge set down the paper and looked at James again. I want to be very clear about something, Mr. Henderson. You have a choice to make. You can be angry about this ruling. You can blame your wife, your lawyer, the system, me, or you can actually listen to what your 7-year-old daughter tried to tell you today. You can do the hard work of changing. The door isn't closed, but you're the only one who can choose to walk through it. There was silence in the courtroom for a long moment. Then James did something Lily had never seen him do before. He put his head in his hands and started to cry. Not quiet, dignified tears, but deep, shaking sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside him. His lawyer looked uncomfortable and tried to get him to pull himself together, but James couldn't seem to stop. Judge Richardson watched this for a moment, then spoke more gently. Mr. Henderson, I'm going to give you the name of an excellent therapist who specializes in helping people break patterns they learned in childhood. I don't know what your home life was like growing up, but people don't usually develop these kinds of controlling behaviors out of nowhere. If you're willing to do the work, there's hope. But you have to be willing. She signed several documents, handed them to the bailiff, and then looked at both families one more time. I'll review this case again in 6 months to see how things are progressing. Court is adjourned. Everyone stood as the judge left. The moment the door closed behind her, Rachel collapsed onto Miss Torres, crying tears of relief. Noah put his arm around both his mother and sister, and the 3 of them stood there in the middle of the courtroom, holding each other like survivors of a shipwreck who'd finally made it to shore. Across the room, James had stood up and was wiping his face with a handkerchief. His lawyer was gathering papers, already mentally moving on to his next case, but James just stood there looking lost. For a moment, Lily thought he might come over and try to talk to them, but he didn't. He just looked at his family, really looked at them, like he was seeing them clearly for the first time in years. Then he did something that surprised everyone. He walked over to where they were standing and stopped a few feet away, keeping a respectful distance. His eyes were red and swollen from crying, and his voice was rough when he spoke. Rachel, he said quietly, I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, and I know you've heard it before. But I want you to know that I actually heard what Lily said today. I heard it, and I'm going to try to understand it. Rachel didn't say anything, just nodded slightly, her arm still around Lily. James looked down at his daughter then, really looked at her. Lily, you're braver than I ever was. Braver than I am now. I don't know if I can change, but I promise I'm going to try. Not because the judge ordered it, but because you deserve better. You all deserve better. Lily didn't know what to say to that. Part of her wanted to hug him, and part of her wanted to run away. In the end, she just stood there, pressed against her mother's side, and nodded. James turned to Noah. "Son, I'm sorry I made you feel like you couldn't play your music." "I'm sorry for all of it." Noah's face worked like he was trying not to cry. He managed to say okay in a strangled voice, and that was all. Then James stepped back. "I should go," he said. "But I wanted you to know that I heard everything today. Every word." He looked at Ms. Torres. "When is the first supervised visit?" "We'll be in touch with you about scheduling," Ms. Torres replied professionally. James nodded and walked away, his lawyer following behind him, looking impatient. They watched him go, and Lily felt something shift inside her. The fear that had lived in her chest for so long had gotten smaller somehow. It wasn't gone completely, but it wasn't taking up all the space anymore. The drive home was different from the drive there. Rachel kept breaking into tears, but they were happy tears this time, relief tears. Noah sat in the back seat with Lily, and for the first time in months he started humming. Just a little melody, barely audible, but it was there. "Are we going to be okay now?" Lily asked her mother. Rachel looked at her in the rearview mirror, and her smile was genuine, reaching all the way to her eyes for the first time in what felt like forever. "Yeah, baby," she said. "I think we're going to be okay. It might take some time, but we're going to be okay." When they got home, the house felt different. It was still the same house, same furniture, same rooms, but somehow it felt bigger, like there was more space to breathe. Rachel opened the windows even though it was cold outside, letting fresh air flow through the rooms. That evening, something remarkable happened. Noah went to his room and came back carrying his guitar. He sat on the couch, and his fingers were shaky at first as he positioned them on the strings. But then he started to play, picking out a simple melody that was rough around the edges but beautiful anyway. Lily watched her mother's face as Noah played. Rachel's eyes filled with tears again, but she was smiling, and then quietly at first she started to hum along. The tune was one Lily vaguely remembered from years ago, from before everything had gotten so hard. And slowly, hesitantly, like a bird learning to fly again, Rachel started to sing. Her voice was rusty from disuse, cracking on some of the notes, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that she was singing. The house was filling with sound, with music, with life. Lily felt something warm and bright expanding in her chest. She thought about what she'd said in court, about love not being supposed to make you small. She thought about the goldfish in its bowl, and she realized that what they'd done today, scary as it had been, was break the glass. They were swimming free now out in open water, and yes, that was frightening in its own way. But it was also full of possibilities. That night, as Lily lay in bed, she could hear her mother singing softly in the kitchen while she washed dishes. She could hear Noah playing his guitar in his room, practicing the same song over and over, getting a little better each time. The house was alive with sound, no longer silent and afraid. Lily pulled her blanket up to her chin and smiled in the darkness. She'd been brave today, braver than she'd ever imagined she could be. And because of that bravery, because she'd found her voice and used it, everything had changed. She fell asleep to the sound of music drifting through the house, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't have nightmares about disappointing anyone. She dreamed instead of butterflies and open skies, and all the possibilities that came with being able to take up space, without fear. The first few weeks after the court hearing were strange in ways Lily hadn't expected. She'd thought that once they won in court, everything would instantly feel better, like flipping a light switch. But healing, she was learning, didn't work that way. It was messier and slower and more complicated than she'd imagined. The house definitely felt lighter without James's presence, but it also felt emptier. Lily would sometimes catch herself listening for his car in the driveway, her body tensing up automatically before she remembered he wasn't coming home. Those old habits of fear didn't disappear overnight. She still found herself being extra quiet during dinner sometimes, still caught herself calculating how to answer questions in just the right way, before remembering she didn't have to do that anymore. Rachel was changing too, but it was like watching a flower bloom in slow motion. Some days she seemed almost giddy with freedom, laughing at things that weren't even that funny, playing music loud while she cooked dinner, wearing a bright yellow sweater she'd bought on impulse at the mall. Other days, Lily would find her mother sitting at the kitchen table staring at nothing, and she knew Rachel was wrestling with complicated feelings that didn't have easy names. One afternoon, about 3 weeks after the hearing, Lily came home from school to find her mother crying in the laundry room. Not the happy relief tears from before, but sad, confused tears that scared Lily a little. "Mom," she said quietly from the doorway. "Are you okay?" Rachel looked up, quickly wiping her face. "Oh, sweetie, I'm fine. Just a hard day." But Lily was getting better at reading people, at understanding that fine didn't always mean fine. She walked over and climbed onto the dryer next to the basket of clothes her mother had been folding. "You can tell me," she said. "I'm not a baby." Rachel let out a long breath and sat down on the floor, leaning against the washing machine. "You're right. You're not a baby. You proved that in court." She was quiet for a moment, picking at a loose thread on her sleeve. "I was just thinking about your dad, about how much I loved him when we first got married, and wondering how we got from there to here, and feeling guilty, I guess." "Guilty for what?" Lily asked, confused. "For not leaving sooner, for letting you and Noah grow up in that environment for so long, for not being brave enough to do what you did until things got really bad." Lily thought about this. She slid down from the dryer and sat next to her mother on the floor. "Mrs. Chen says that being brave doesn't mean you're never scared. It means you do the hard thing even when you are scared. And you were scared for a long time, but you still did the hard thing eventually. That counts." Rachel pulled Lily close and kissed the top of her head. "When did you get so wise?" "I've always been wise," Lily said with a small smile. "You just notice it more now." Noah was having his own journey. He'd started playing guitar again, but he was rusty, and having to relearn things frustrated him. One evening, Lily heard him in his room, playing the same chord progression over and over, messing it up, and then she heard a crash as he threw something against the wall. She knocked on his door. "Noah, can I come in?" "Whatever," came the muffled response. She opened the door to find him sitting on his bed, his guitar on the floor where he'd tossed it. His face was red and angry in a way that reminded her uncomfortably of their father. "I can't do it," he said. "I've forgotten everything. I used to be able to play that song with my eyes closed, and now I can't even get through the first verse without messing up." Lily sat down next to him. "You will again. You just need practice." "I had practice. I had years of practice. And I let him take it away from me." Noah's voice cracked. "I let him make me stop doing something I loved because I was too chicken to stand up to him. You're 7 years old and you stood up to him in a courtroom full of people. But I couldn't even keep playing my guitar in my own room." "That's not fair," Lily said quietly. "We all dealt with it in different ways. You protected me lots of times, remember? Like when I spilled juice that time and you said it was your fault so Dad wouldn't be mad at me. We all did what we could to survive. There's no wrong way to survive." Noah looked at his little sister with surprise. "When did you learn to talk like that?" "I've been paying attention," Lily said. She picked up his guitar from the floor and handed it back to him. "Try again. I'll sit here and listen. Even if you mess up every single note, I'll still think it sounds good." And so Noah played, and he did mess up a lot. But Lily sat there listening like she'd promised, and slowly the anger in his face softened into concentration, and then into something that almost looked like peace. The first supervised visit with James was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon, 3 weeks after the court hearing. It was supposed to take place at the Family Connection Center, a place specifically designed for visits like these. There would be a supervisor in the room the whole time, making sure everything stayed appropriate and comfortable for everyone. Lily was nervous about it in a way that surprised her. She'd been so brave in court, so clear about what she needed to say. But now, faced with actually sitting in a room with her father again, she felt small and uncertain. What were they supposed to talk about? What if it was awkward? What if she started to feel scared again? Rachel must have sensed her anxiety because the morning of the visit, she sat down with both kids at the kitchen table. "I want you both to know something important," she said. "You don't have to go if you don't want to. The judge said your dad gets to have visits, but you're still people with your own feelings. If you're not ready, that's okay." Noah looked down at his hands. "I think I want to see him. I don't know why, but I do." "Me too," Lily said quietly. "I'm scared, but I want to go." Rachel nodded. "Okay, but I'm going to be right outside the whole time. If you need me, you just have to say the word and we're done. Your comfort and safety come first. Always." The Family Connection Center was a cheerful-looking building with bright blue doors and a playground out front. Inside, it looked more like a playroom than an official facility. There were toys and books scattered around, comfortable couches and big windows that let in lots of light. A woman named Mrs. Patterson greeted them warmly. She explained that she'd be in the room during the visit, but mostly in the background unless she was needed. When James arrived, Lily felt her stomach clench. He looked different somehow. Smaller maybe, or maybe just less sure of himself. He was carrying a bag with him, and his eyes were uncertain as he looked at his children. "Hi," he said softly. "Hi, Dad," Noah replied, his voice only stuttering a little. "Hi," Lily echoed. They sat down on one of the couches, an awkward distance between them at first. James set the bag down and cleared his throat. "I wasn't sure what to bring. I got you some books, Lily. And Noah, there's some new guitar strings in there. I know yours were getting old." It was such a small thing, but it meant he'd been paying attention. He'd remembered what they cared about. Lily felt something tight in her chest loosen just a little bit. The first visit was stilted and uncomfortable in places. They talked about safe things at first, school and the weather and a movie Noah wanted to see. But about halfway through the hour, James did something he'd never really done before. He asked them questions and actually listened to the answers without correcting them or redirecting the conversation. "What are you reading right now, Lily?" he asked. "A book about a girl who finds a magical garden," Lily said. "It's really good. There's this part where she plants seeds and they grow into different colors depending on how she's feeling when she plants them." "That sounds nice," James said, and he didn't change the subject or start talking about something else. He just let her keep going, telling him about the plot and her favorite characters, and he nodded and smiled in the right places. With Noah, James asked about the guitar, and when Noah mentioned he was struggling to remember songs he used to know, James didn't say anything dismissive. Instead, he said, "That must be frustrating, but you'll get it back. You're talented."